In the first video of this two-part study of the differences between a $500 watch and a $5,000 watch, I took a first-hand look at two examples of watches that represent their respective segments in the watch market fairly well. The Hamilton Khaki Automatic at 38mm and the Rolex Explorer at 39mm share many features and design elements in common. By the end of the first video, I speculated that by merely holding each watch in the hand or wearing them on the wrist, it might not make enough of an impression to see the cost differences between the two of these watches. But is it really adequate to say that the Hamilton is hands down the obvious choice just because they're so similar at the first glance? In part 2 of this comparison, in this video we have some broader issues to consider. I'm going to investigate how Rolex as an independent brand and Hamilton as owned by Swatch are positioned differently as companies, both historically and presently as manufacturers. This general conversation is going to enable us to distinguish some of the more in-depth technical differences between the Hamilton and the Rolex. Materials, manufacturing process, build quality, Swiss-made logo, movement specifications and technologies, etc. Getting into some of these details will help us reconsider some of the conclusions of the last video. Let's begin the discussion with the Hamilton brand. Hamilton first produced watches in 1893, and the company produced a variety of pocket watches and wristwatches and were famous for their extremely high level of quality, especially with regard to their movements. American Hamiltons were regarded by collectors as the Patek Philippe of American watches. During the Second World War, Hamilton restructured its manufacturing to provide watches to serve the military. From the 1970s to the 1990s, Hamilton as a brand transitioned ownership and production to Switzerland, and in 1990 they were acquired by the Swatch Group. Swatch Hamiltons shared little in common with the American manufactured Hamiltons, other than some nods and design themes and certain revived models such as the Khaki. Hence, in order to really understand how a Hamilton is manufactured, we need to take a look at the Swatch Group and their manufacturing process. Now, the Swatch Group is the world's largest watch company. In 2013, they made $9.8 billion. Throughout the world, the Swatch Group employs over 30,000 people in over 50 countries. Now, Swatch owns over 18 brands of watches at all levels. The Swatch Group basically has 4 tiers of watch brands, and the Hamilton brand falls into their middle range. Now, the middle range accounts for the largest percentage of their sales each year. Clearly, this hits a sweet spot for consumers who might be interested in a known heritage brand and the reputation of Swiss quality. But this range of watches is also one that Swatch is able to leverage its manufacturing power for, given the regulations for a Swiss-made watch. Again, by way of review, most Swiss watches have just enough Swiss content so that they're able to legally use the Swiss-made title on their dial. The technicalities of this label become obvious in the details. Now, according to the Federation of the Swiss Watch Industry, a watch is legally considered Swiss-made if A, its movement is Swiss, and B, its movement is encased in Switzerland, and C, that the manufacturer conducts a final inspection of the watch in Switzerland. The first requirement for a Swiss-made watch, that its movement is Swiss, has its own set of sub-requirements. A Swiss movement is defined as a watch that has been assembled in Switzerland and the movement has been inspected by the manufacturer in Switzerland. And thirdly, that the components of the Swiss manufacturer movement account for at least 60% of the total value, not considering the cost of assembly. Considering this watch is the largest Swiss watch company, these details play a critical role in their manufacturing process. In fact, the Swatch Group reports that they have over 450 business units throughout the world, principally in Switzerland, but they also report that they have 156 production centers located all over the world: Thailand, Malaysia, China, the Virgin Islands, Germany, Italy, France, and even the United States. Without a doubt, it's cheaper for the Swatch Group to source components from its cheapest possible location and then apply the Swiss label upon it following the technicalities. One Hamilton, actually my wife's watch, reveals some details that suggest this manufacturing process. On one side of the case back, you see the Swiss-made logo, but on the other side, you see that the case is actually made in Thailand. Certainly my wife's khaki is just one convenient example. Nevertheless, most industry insiders are in agreement concerning the structure of this Swiss watch manufacturing process, at least for watches of this tier. To be specific, at watches of this level, it's likely that the cases, the bracelets, the dials, the hands are all probably overseas produced. That isn't to deny that some of these parts might be produced in Switzerland, although that's probably only done if it's convenient for the Swatch Group or if it has some sort of marketing value. Certainly when you visit the Hamilton website, there's no details outlining the specifics of the Swiss-made manufacturing process. I think it's good for consumers to be aware of these manufacturing details, but don't misunderstand me. Hamiltons are very high quality watches. I've been extremely happy with mine, and the general consensus in the watch community is that they represent a very good value. And certainly the Swatch Group is a tremendously huge force in the world of watches for preserving the horological heritage of many of these brands that would have otherwise been lost. If we're taking a look at Rolex, what constitutes a Swiss watch for them is significantly different. Rolex was founded in 1905 in England by Hans Wilsdorf and Alfred Davis, and they moved its operations to Geneva in 1919. Rolex, of course, is another Swiss watch titan, the largest single branded manufacturer in the world, and in 2012 the revenues were over $7 billion, and it's estimated they made over 1 million watches. Although Rolex is considered by many watch collectors as being very conservative, probably due to the fact that certain models of theirs have existed in largely unchanged manners for decades, and their internal operations and communications are notoriously reticent, Rolex has nevertheless made a number of significant innovations to contribute to horology. In 1926, they developed the first waterproof wristwatch, the so-called Oyster watch, thanks to a screwback case and a screwed crown. Rolex has consistently pushed the envelope for water resistance, and in 1953, the Rolex Submariner reference 6204 was the first wristwatch that was waterproof to 100 meters. Rolex is probably also to thank for the popularity of the chronometer, which is just a way of certifying accuracy in timepieces. All of Rolex's movements are chronometer-grade movements, although only 6% of Swiss movements produced are chronometer-grade. Rolex's approach to manufacturing may be the most impressive in the entire industry. In 4 massive facilities, Rolex makes almost all of the materials for their watches completely in-house, starting with base materials. Of course, most of the parts are made by CNC machines, but nevertheless, in spite of the huge production, all parts of Rolex watches are still hand-assembled, although sometimes with the help of a machine. One well-known and interesting example is how Rolex makes their watch dials. Of course, most Rolexes have applied hour markers that are gold. Now, these gold markers come from gold that's made in Rolex's own foundry. Each indice on the dial is applied and riveted by hand. Rolex apparently discovered that humans spot problems with this kind of assembly more easily than machines. After they're assembled, they're dropped from 20 centimeters in the air to ensure that none of the hour markers fall out. This is done with each dial and is certainly a time-consuming process. With their steel case watches, Rolex currently uses 904L stainless steel rather than the standard 316L stainless steel. 904L is arguably a higher grade of steel, and it's known to have a higher pitting resistance equivalent number, a PREN number, than standard 316L. 904L has more copper in its composition, which makes it more acid resistant but also makes it less hyperallergenic. And although this is arguably marketing, Rolex states that 904L is a whiter steel that takes on a more luxurious polish than standard 316L. As far as case parts, all of them are initially polished or finished by a robot, but interestingly they're still hand finished by a person. And although Rolex isn't perfectly clear about it, the movement assembly is also done in part by hand. What's likely, based on what I've read, is that they're machine assembled and then hand regulated, sent off for certification, and the final assembly process, where rotors and a few other parts are installed, are done by hand. Each individual Rolex is also subject to waterproof testing, and each Oyster watch is subjected to a test that is at least 10% greater than its listed depth resistance, and that's a greater percentage with the divers watches. Rolex's movements are basically proven workhorses. They're known to maintain their accuracy over a long time, but they're also known for being relatively ugly, especially at this price point. Omega has certainly jumped ahead as far as watch finishing goes at this price segment. Now, nevertheless, Rolex does implement a number of modern technologies in their movements which sets them aside from standard ETA e-Bosches. Okay, so first of all, the movements are in-house, and secondly, they're implementing technologies which I described in greater depth in my Explorer video, the use of proprietary hairsprings and innovative shock absorbers. In summary, you're probably getting at least a conservatively 90% real Swiss watch, implementing the very best practices of modern Swiss watchmaking when you get a Rolex. At tiers that are higher than Rolex, you get many aspects of traditional watchmaking which Rolex has largely abandoned to modern manufacturing. But those handmade elements are something that are mostly artistic and not functional. I want to go on the record saying that I think the best merits of Rolex are the extraordinary manufacturing standards that they've been able to implement, as well as the carefully considered design and robust construction of these wristwatches. There's an argument that could be made that Rolexes are desirable as an aspirational or luxury good, but to me the idea of luxury items as a concept is sort of petit bourgeois, kind of banal. Rolex has always tried to position itself as a luxury watch, and certainly their advertisements and use of celebrities have tried to create consumer expectations that they are offering a premium product. But to me, it signifies something maybe a little bit more cynical, that Rolex is trying to see what the market can bear. And the use of technologies and manufacturing standards that I've discussed in this video could very well be to just create expectations to consumers. These qualifications aside, Rolexes are a hell of a watch, and this Explorer is certainly one of the toughest all-around watches that I've been ever able to handle. It is just impeccable in its construction, and overall, the feeling is that it will last decades without any attention at all, even though, of course, you would want to have it regularly maintained just because it's so nice. All this enables us to more explicitly revisit our comparison between the Hamilton Khaki and the Rolex Explorer. In a lot of ways, these watches are sort of doing the same thing. They're basic field watches meant for simple timekeeping. They're built in a robust way so that they should be able to handle a number of environments that aren't too extreme, but probably within the range of most people's busy lives. With a watch like this, which I imagine could be worn for decades, I can understand the desire to have the nicest available version out there, and the Rolex certainly exhibits a number of manufacturing standards that are simply higher than the Hamilton. And while the Rolex Explorer and the Hamilton Khaki both have great provenance in terms of the origins of these watches, it is true that Hamilton is basically a shell of its former company, whereas Rolex is as established as it's ever been. In my opinion, both of these watches have kind of gone a dressy direction that takes them away from their original purpose. But if you accept that direction as one that actually makes the watches more versatile, then in that sense the Rolex is the better of the two. And again, just to reemphasize, since this was the emphasis of this video, I think that the Rolex is manufactured to a higher standard. The movement is better in the Rolex. The fit and finish is better in the Rolex. The assembly of all of the pieces of the watch is more refined and more robust. Every aspect of the Rolex is in some sense better than the Hamilton, except for the price. And for the price, the Hamilton is much, much more accessible. But if it was up to me, or up to my son Leo pictured here, I would have to pick the Rolex. Well, if you got through both videos in this two-part series, make sure you let me know in the comments below what you thought of them. I really appreciate you watching, and I'd really appreciate your subscription if you haven't subscribed. Feel free to click through some of these links to check out some of my other watch-related videos, and thanks a lot for your time.